Do you like art journaling, painting, assemblage and collage? Then you come to the right place. I'm Bea Grob and I love to inspire you. Hey everybody, welcome back to my studio. So glad you joined me today again for another video, for another project. It's quite a different project. I hope you enjoy it also, but I really did enjoy playing with fabric and laces and transfers and even rose petals and ephemera and Derwent inktanks and some gauze, whatever. So yeah, this idea was since a while in my head, and I knew I wanted to do something on fabric, especially on muslin. I do like the muslin look. So I wanted to try out this transfer, and that's actually a picture. Again, it's from the family, but unfortunately I don't remember who it is. We never kept so much track on our family like some people do. So I know it's from the family, and I'm pretty sure I'm thinking it is from the southern part of Switzerland, from the canton of Tessin, what we call it, because my grandfather came from there, and for me it looks Italian, just to say. Anyway, so yeah, it's gonna be a longer video, and I'm gonna do voiceover while I sped up the video, so just to compress the time you have to watch it. It is a longer process and it is a several day process, but I still thought you might like it. Anyway, I start with some gesso and then I do the transfer, and then comes the part where I start adding a little bit of Derwent inktanks coloring, because as always with transfers you have parts where it doesn't transfer, so there were no hints of the transfer, which isn't a really big thing because I was planning on adding a little flower bunch anyway. So that's lucky me, you know. There are some parts missing here too. You can see I don't know whether you can see it. Let's put it up. So there are parts missing here and here and here. So, but that doesn't bother me. It's part of the process and it gives an even more vintagey look. That's what I'm thinking. And then I did use all kind of laces. Some I did apply with the sewing machine and some I did apply by hand stitching. And for the stitching I did use those floss yarns, sometimes two parts. The floss yarns are those which you can take apart and you have several threads. And that's what I have used for stitching. But I also did use some vintage silk threads. I did use this one, I know that for sure. And when I was done, I was thinking, how am I gonna present that? How am I gonna hang that? And I had the idea, I have those hangers. They are actually wire hangers. They are not that wire hangers you get in the wash salons. I couldn't find them. That's what I actually wanted. But one day I came across those hangers in the IKEA. They were white, so I had to paint them, which you're gonna see. So I wanted to use those, and to make it removable, I actually made buttonholes and used buttons. So yeah, now as always, if there are any questions, don't hesitate. Maybe I do forget to mention a thing, maybe not. Now with no further ado, let's go down to the table and watch the process. Take care. Okay, here we go. As you see, I started with gesso and this roller. I was struggling a little bit with the fabric moving around, and I ended up taping it down with a plain painter's tape just to make my life a little bit easier. Now the goal of this specific roller with lace around was to get some patterning, which didn't work out as well as you can see here. Here is my copy. It is a laser print. I've never worked with inkjet prints, but from what I have seen on YouTube, you could also use the inkjet transfers. I just don't have any experience with that. So if you only have access to an inkjet print, check first those YouTubes about inkjet transfers, or you go to a shop where you can have your image printed on a laser printer. As you have seen, I did tear it up a little bit. I didn't want the whole background, I just was interested in the girl and the chair. Before I placed it on the fabric, I have used gel matte on both the paper itself and the fabric, just to make sure that I have enough gel matte. And I also was very careful not to have any gel matte on the top of the backside of the paper. Having gel matte on the back of the paper means you have a hard time to remove the paper. Now I did let that dry overnight, which doesn't show off so much on the video because I squeeze everything together. But anyway, I do let it dry overnight mostly, and then I start by spritzing slightly with some water and start peeling off. I'm really lucky when I can peel off like whole pieces in the beginning. So it's like layers of paper, so I do remove the first layer before I can go in with just water and some rubbing. Don't rub too hard. It's more like a gliding over, and you can feel the paper pulp which you still have to remove. And yes, you're always gonna have parts where you rub off too much, at least in my world. But usually I don't care so much about that. It gives me the distressed look I'm after. And just so you know, I did edit out some parts of me rubbing off paper pulp. I think you get the idea. It just takes a little bit of time. As next step, I started gathering my things together. I usually pull out quite a bit of materials and supplies just to figure out what works and what not. I finally have narrowed down my floss yarns which I want to use, the color scheme, and I'm starting embroidering. First I start with my rose petals, which I have covered with some tulle, and now I'm gonna stitch around. The petals are from my garden. I have simply ironed them between two papers. I simply went around with a running stitch, nothing fancy. Now the petals did move around a bit, so I ended up using a little bit of a glue stick just to keep them in place. The fabric is in some parts pretty stiff, so especially where there is the transfer and the gesso, so I ended up using an awl or any kind of poking tool to pre-drill, so to speak, the holes. Once I'm around all those petals, I'm gonna simply knot it off. I'm not particularly neat on the back side, it just doesn't bother me. I also add paper pieces. This specific one is an old embroidery pattern which is in my stash, but I also gonna use newer pieces like this little rose here, but to make it more vintage I do cover it up with some used tea bag. But I also have this really old piece of lace. I have no idea what it is. It is already shredded, so I have no concerns to tear up pieces. Somebody gave me that with no explanation what it is, so whether it was a tablecloth or something from a dress, I really don't know. I do use some matte medium to glue the used tea bag on top of the rose, and then I'm gonna use gel matte to attach the papers. As always, I do fiddle around a little bit to find the right placement for the right thing. That is a process I do very often, just figuring out what I want and then trying to figure out the right spot for those things. Now my next step is to work a little bit with the Derwent Inktense. They are water soluble, and I'm just adding some greenery because I want to do a flower bunch in the girl's hand. But I also want to add a little bit of like grass. I know it doesn't make sense, the chair is probably not in the grass, but I want to add a little bit of grass on the bottom of the piece. Now for the flower stems, I just use like long straight stitches, running stitches, nothing fancy. For the flowers I use the French knot in different shades of purple, just one color after the other, and filling it randomly in until I get sort of a bunch of flowers. Now I'm ready to work a little bit on the right hand side. I do glue down my paper pieces and even the lace. I think I do add a little bit of gel matte just to make the stitching process a little bit easier. Is it completely glued down? Certainly not, but enough that I don't have to deal with floppy papers and laces. I had the feeling there was something missing, so I decided to add another piece of lace, also again a vintage, I have no idea where I have it from, just to complete those right side a little bit. And then you did see me using those L-shaped cardboard pieces. That helps me to see how the image looks at the end, just sort of like a finder. And now back to the stitching. Again, it is a simple stitch, nothing fancy, just a straight stitch. I usually tend to use the more simpler stitch, like a French knot or a running stitch or a back stitch, sometimes a blanket stitch, and did I mention the chain stitch? That's basically those stitches I use. I don't know whether you have noticed, but this embroidery is worked over a piece of tulle, and that's how I'm gonna attach it most of the time. I'm gonna go into the embroidery itself too, but I'm gonna start on the tulle piece. Now I want to sort of frame this piece a little bit with some stem stitches, so to have it somewhat straight I'm using a ruler to mark it slightly with the pencil. As I said, I'm gonna go around with the stem stitch. This is the first time I'm using 3 threads instead of just 2, so just to make it a little bit bolder. And I was lucky enough to have a hue that's the same sort of color I do find in the transfer. As I mentioned, I couldn't find those hangers from the wash so long, so I did use the one from the IKEA, which has sort of a white collar on top, which I did rough up with some sanding paper. Now I wanted to mimic a little bit the colors that are in the transfer too, so I did mix up a neutral grey with some purple. To apply, I did use a simple piece of a cosmetic sponge. Off camera, I did use the sewing machine to add 2 pieces of lace at the top and the bottom of my work. And now I'm sewing in some buttonholes because I want it attached so that I can remove it. So I'm gonna do 3 buttonholes and then obviously gonna also sew on 3 buttons. Now those threads are sometimes very curly and make little knots, which you don't want obviously. For me it helps when I use a little bit of the thread conditioner or sometimes also some beeswax. As you can see, I did knot the ends of the threads on the front side. I just wanted those little ends hanging out, not the classical way how you do buttons. I hope you enjoyed this project. Till next time, take care.